Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. We're so excited you're here today. We're going to give it another minute or so just to let a few other people trickle on in, and then we'll get started. Okay, so we are almost a minute past the hour. So let's start to kick things off. Welcome, everyone. We're so excited you're here. Today, we're going to be exploring the 2026 State of Data Protection in Pharma and Life Sciences report. The research for this report is based on open source intelligence gathering, including clinical trial registries, regulatory filings, technology disclosures, and breach notifications. And I don't want to ruin it right away, but spoiler alert, the big takeaway we found is a structural gap. This isn't a gap that better tools or policies can paper over. Rather, it's a gap that reflects how pharma data moves and the cracks that are beginning to show because governance can't keep up. However, before we kick things off, I would love to do some quick introductions. So joining me today is my colleague, Haig, our Director of Business Development, and Peter McMullen, our Senior Solutions Consultant. And my name is Patrick Bryden. I'll be your host and moderator today. Before we move forward, just two notes to pass on. One, this webinar will be recorded and will be shared shortly after we conclude today. So keep your eyes on the inbox and feel free to share it with any of your colleagues who cannot join us. And number two, we want this to be a conversation rather than a one-way presentation. So please feel free to share questions, comments, ideas as we go along in the chat box or the Q&A box. Fantastic. All right, Haig and Peter, are we ready?
Let's get after it.
Let's go. Perfect. So to kick things off, I'm going to turn it over to Peter to talk about the old model and the new model of data protection.
Yeah, so we just want to kind of set the stage here. The governance frameworks that most organizations have built were designed around the core assumption that data stays in the building or in your castle. That's been the reasonable way to think about it. You secure the walls, you secure the systems inside those walls, and that's more or less sufficient. Unfortunately, in pharma, or just, factually in pharma, documents have to move. They go to CROs and CMOs running your trials. They go to regulators for IND and NDA submissions. They go to biostat firms and academic collaborators and AI systems now that are powering drug discovery. So this is all areas that your data is leaving that castle, leaving those walls that you've worked really hard to protect and to lock down. And that's just a fact of the industry. It's not a security failure. And that's what we want to start to discuss in this. And some of the areas that we're going to be looking into is where I'll dive into next, Patrick.
Perfect.
So again, we want to set the stage. We want to set a proper foundation before we start to build off of these things. So in our report, we want to be very clear that the pharmaceutical and life sciences industry has always dealt with a lot of sensitive information. In the report, we call that like the data package, for example. Our discussion today isn't that there's all of a sudden a lot of more of that information involved. It's rather how much that information is being shared, the complexity of the structure of the industry, and the involvement of AI in day-to-day operations that's made keeping the sensitive information significantly more difficult. A point that we'll do our best to expand upon is kind of how all of those things are tying together to make protecting sensitive data a lot more complex and a much deeper discussion. Right now, this is even more prevalent than ever because of the fundamentals of how data moves has changed. It's going to CROs, it's going to those central labs, it's going to imaging vendors, pharmacovigilance partners, and the regulators in every jurisdiction that the trial touches. Heike, maybe you can get a little bit deeper into this.
Yeah, and to add to that, it now flows into obviously the biggest topic of conversation, AI tools that, promise, pharmaceutical companies that it will help compress development timelines by years, which is significant for pharmaceutical companies as that's what they need to do to drive their business. And when companies lose control of its data, they don't just have security incidents. They face threats that their executive windows, their FDA relationships, and their ability to partner. So it's just something that we're definitely looking forward to having a conversation about.
Yeah, Hike, and this is a really good transition to diving into what exactly we found in the report.
Yeah, and before we go into the findings, we just want to quickly highlight to everyone the methodology. We scored about 199 organizations. Every score in this research was came from open source data. No one was surveyed. We didn't ask security teams to self-report. We looked at the organizations and disclosed publicly and scored them across 8 different data points that we have listed above. So therapeutic sensitivity to trial footprint to AI adoption depth. And from that, we see the scores that we came out with, and the sector average came out to be about 29.6 out of 40, and no organization, which is interesting, scored lower than a cohort was of 19. So remember that this is because that the way the data is handled, coupled with the nature of the work, it's not a failure in governance. So Peter, do you have any comments on the governance and all that stuff?
Yeah, for sure. I think just wanting to go back, the floor of this is 19 out of 40. There's no low risk pharmaceutical organization here. These scores are almost certainly understated as well. Like it was mentioned, we are not using all of the data points in existence, just the ones that we could get access to publicly. Clinical trial registries and investor filings show primary CRO relationships. They don't show sub CRO networks, central lab partnerships, AI tools that individual employees use on a day-to-day basis. The actual third party chain is longer, and the actual AI footprint is deeper than any external analyst like us can see. The real takeaway here obviously isn't the number, it's what the number reflects. The risk isn't a governance failure, it's structural. Pharma work requires handling the most sensitive information a patient possesses by regulatory mandate and moving it constantly by operational necessity. The exposure is irreducible. The big question is whether it's governed. Haig, back to you on
Yeah.
that.
And actually, what really stood out to me wasn't the average score, it was the distribution. And nearly 60% of the organizations landed in a high category, and another 27% landed in critical. And that's not a few outliers. That clearly is showing what's going on in the industry. And to me, that really reinforces the core point of the report that governance it isn't governance failure. It's a reflection of how pharmaceutical data has to move, as to your point, Peter, earlier, between organizations, systems, and now obviously AI tools.
And I think this is a good segue into diving into the report, and then also looking at the major findings from the report. So we have 3 findings to explore. First finding is the idea that governance ends at the door. This is because every clinical document platform was built to govern data inside a controlled environment. However, as we all know, the moment a file is exported, the control is going to stop while the document continues to move.
Yeah, and Patrick, Viva Vault, Metadata, Encore, other companies that the platforms are designed to control data within their environment, and they're designed that really, really well. The issue isn't the platform. The problem becomes is the moment that data is exported. And a key thing to point out here is that tag, classification, and labels on documents created by the solutions a company uses becomes informational once that document leaves the system. Let's go through a simple high-level version of what likely happens consistently with clinical data trial. Peter?
Ooh, I get to do the example now?
Oh,
Sick.
yeah.
Okay, sweet. Okay, so let's get this down properly then. Again, this is a very simplistic view of what happens pretty frequently in the pharmaceutical industry. So we start on the left there. Everything is in control within governance. The document starts within your secure environment. There's classification that's correct. The access controls are working, and then it gets exported because it has to. Once it gets exported, that's where governance ends, for the sponsor at the very least. When we move over to step two, the documents that were exported, that package is sent to a CRO, to regional coordinators, to a central lab. This is when the classification tag becomes informational and not enforceable. When we get to step three, recipients are able to then forward, save, drop this into a company approved AI work tool, into a personal AI work tool. The sponsor has no visibility to any of this. They aren't able to revoke any of these privileges. There's no audit trail. And this, again, is not a platform problem with the clinical document. It's an architecture problem. The governance is designed for the environment that the sponsor controls, not the data that the sponsor controls. And once the data leaves the environment, there's no governance that follows along with it.
Great
Thanks
point,
for letting me
Peter.
do that there,
Yeah,
Haig. I
absolutely.
like doing
Appreciate
those examples.
Thanks for walking it through. Thanks for walking us through that. And when a trial lead exports the latest protocol addendum from Viva and sends it to the CRO, three regional studies coordinators in the central labs, the classification tag that was applied inside Viva becomes very informational. And it's no longer enforceable. The recipients can now forward that document, save it to personal drives, or drop it into a generated AI tool. And the sponsor, who that information is very valuable to them, has no visibility over it, no ability to revoke access or have an audit trail for that information.
We're on the same plane there,
Yeah,
Haig. We agree with each
absolutely.
other for sure.
Yeah,
So the big thing is that the file itself can have a lot of governance around it, but we should be really specific about what the primary focus of this discussion is, which is EPHI in unstructured documents. Structured EDC fields are generally well governed. There are controls around them. They are properly protected, but the PHI that sits in things like monitoring reports or protocol amendments, patient narratives, informed consent packages, that lives in document types like PDFs, Word documents, Excel files. And with the new 2026 HIPAA security rule overhaul, it appears to be explicit on this. Sponsors are now required to maintain asset inventories of every system that creates, receives, maintains, transmits. I could keep going with the verbs, EPHI, and that explicitly includes AI software.
Awesome. Thanks, Peter. So that's the transition to finding number two. And what we found is the chain is longer than many of us think. If we wanted to say that another way, the picture of pharma's data supply chain really understates the risk. Peter, I'm going to turn it back to you so you can dive in a little bit more.
Oh, baby. Okay. We've got this is my favorite diagram, I think, in the report. So I really wanted to do this slide. So we're going to start off with a number here. Um, yeah, we're starting off with a number here. 87% of healthcare and pharmaceutical companies have been negatively affected by a breach in their third-party ecosystem. That number makes sense when you look at how big that ecosystem actually is. And you can see that in this diagram. The third-party stuff happens as soon as we move beyond that primary CRO. Top of mind when thinking about third-party risk is the primary CRO, of course. That's the relationship with the signed DPA, the named security requirements, and the audit rights. What's not always accounted for is the primary CRO's impact. A single phase 3 oncology trial, for example, can involve a primary CRO, two or three sub-CROs handling specific geographies or functions, a central lab, an independent imaging vendor, a biomarker lab, a site management organization, and a pharmacovigilance partner. And I want everybody to applaud me for getting that word not right, not once, but twice. Each of those organizations has its own technology stack, data handling practices, staff making decisions about how to work with the sponsor's data package. The sponsor's governance covers none of them because the governance ended at the first export. We really, really want to highlight that, yes, that first point around governance is important. And the second point is about how far away from your governance information gets in the modern pharmaceutical and life sciences era.
Well done, Peter. That was really good. So that's a great segue into the contract gap. And all of the members of the third-party chain that have data processing agreements that define what they can and can't do with their data. This matters because most sponsors believe that the DPA close the third-party problems, which they don't. Wow, I'm summing up my words, and Peter had all the big words, huh? And the DPAs define what organizations are permitted to do. They don't control what employees actually do. So a CRO statistician who pastes interim analysis into an AI tool to speed up summaries isn't necessarily violating the letter of an agreement written in 2021, because agreements written in 2021 don't anticipate generative AI. And the contract describes behavior, it doesn't control it. And that really leads to a question that we get a lot from security and legal teams is, can you provide what happened after the file was shared? And for us, most organizations can demonstrate who they intend to share the information with. Far few can actually demonstrate where that information was stored, whether it entered an AI system, whether it crossed into another justification, sorry about that, whether it's copied into another environment. That's the difference between contractual governance and operation governance. One of the most common examples that is well intended in trying to work faster, they receive sensitive trial information. The people then, under pressure, try to produce a summary, generate insights, and prepare reportings. So they paste portions of that data, which, I think we're all human, we do, into AI tools. They're not trying to be malicious with this. They just want to do their jobs, right? And the issue is that the sponsor has no visibility into that decision and no ability to provide where that information has gone. And that's why the problem isn't bad actors. It's just the architect that we're looking to help.
Yeah, Hagen, you touched on it a lot there, and this turns us into, to steal a joke from one of our earlier webinars, to the spookiest slide of them all, where we discuss AI, and more specifically, shadow AI. So the third finding of the report, and how you touched on it quite a bit there, is the role that AI plays. So the inclusion of AI in everyday work adds significant complexities to data security. And from our point of view, or from the report's point of view, this is just an extension of the chain of custody problem, but in an environment that is much more difficult to see and to audit.
Well said.
I mean, yeah.
Go ahead, Peter.
No, it's a really good point. I want to get into it. I'm excited.
Absolutely.
I'm climbing over you to start talking about it. This slide is just a really good example of kind of what Patrick started off talking about, and what we mean and what we discuss a lot in the report. When a CRO statistician, I'm not perfect, summarizes an interim analysis in ChatGPT, the sponsor's data package has entered a foundation model which they have no record of. This creates an evidence gap. If a regulator, auditor, partner, or internal investigator asks, did this information ever enter an external AI system? Many organizations can't answer that definitively. They can point to policies, they can point to training, but they often can't produce solid evidence, right? That's the issue here. At least when it's being communicated to humans, there's a chain of emails, other communications. But when it comes to AI, there's not those receipts necessarily. The IP is now potentially retained in model weights. That data might then surface in later responses, in logs, in sessions by someone who shouldn't have access to that data. The sponsor has no record, if that does occur, of this process. There's no log entry, no audit trail, no mechanism to revoke. The content could sit in output caches. It could sit in session logs, in training pipelines. The pharma data stays sensitive for 15 to 20 years. but none of this is a malicious act. People are busy. They need help getting their jobs done. And it's not necessarily a malicious act to take advantage of existing powerful tools. So the goal here is to talk about how to make this possible for employees to do while making the important information extremely safe. So, I know that you wanted to talk a little bit more about why this has to work.
Yeah, and just Peter, like great point there.
Mm.
That one of the challenges that we see is the security aspect of it, but the business users need to get their job done and need to move quickly. So how do you find that balance of all that? So it's a very good point. And yes, I do want to talk about how AI has worked into pharma, and the data makes the business case for AI and pharma pretty airtight. And a finding that we look at was a pharma company, its first drug that was discovered and designed by AI, it was end to end, which is now in phase 2, which is really impressive to see because you're seeing the evolution of how AI is coming in. And the company then nominated candidates in a 12 to 18 month compared to a industry baseline of 4 to 6 years. That's a huge difference, right? And obviously pharma companies are going to pay attention to look at how much time we cut off from that. And McKinsey has sized the near-term clinical development opportunities alone from 13 to $25 billion annually. And the FDA has been reviewing AI-assisted submissions for nearly a decade, over 500 of them. And a point that I do want to talk about is for mid-sized sponsors competing and developing timelines, regulatory credibility. AI is essential. So the question isn't whether adopt it. The question is whether companies can do it without exposing the very IP and patent data that makes the program, so valuable to them.
It's all really good points, Haig, and there's a lot of good reasons why this hasn't been fully integrated yet, and all of them tie back to a level of control, which is obviously a huge point of what we're talking about today. Sending EPHI to a third-party LLM without persistent protection is an unauthorized disclosure. IP sent to foundational models can be retained or surfaced in training. The regulatory environment is tightening on both ends. FDA's January 2025 guidance introduces a credibility assessment framework for AI and submissions, meaning that AI-assisted work that can't demonstrate provenance and control will face scrutiny and not acceptance, of course. The EU's AI Act classifies clinical trial recruitment. AI has clinical trial recruitment AI as high risk under Annex 3. Penalties of up to 35 million euros or 7% of global turnover. But the global trials fall under multiple regulatory structures at once. So the EU clinical data, US PHI, Chinese patient data don't coexist cleanly inside a single model. Residency requires conflict. Most AI governance frameworks weren't built for multi-jurisdictional constraint by design. AI adoption isn't optional for most pharmaceutical organizations, and the productivity gains are too great. So the question that everybody probably starts off asking, which is how do we stop AI, isn't the real or the reasonable or the realistic question. The real one, as we see it, is how do we safely use AI while maintaining control over patient data, intellectual property, and regulated information? Everybody recognizes that the kind of pattern of the real question is always a lot longer than the fake one we kind of put up ahead of that. But of course, things are always more complex than the simple question. And the organizations that solve that question will move faster than competitors because they'll have the advantage of a very powerful tool set that they're able to rely on or take advantage of without fear of solid and serious repercussions.
Awesome. Thank you, Peter. And now we transition to again, I teed up the spooky slide, but this is the real spooky slide. Shadow AI is the big problem. So for those unfamiliar, shadow AI is a term that's becoming increasingly common. Essentially, it's the use of unauthorized or unvetted AI tools, platforms, or plugins. We got some sweet stats on the slide. So first two stats tee up the challenges of shadow AI. 97% of organizations with AI-related breaches lacked proper AI access controls, while 20% of breaches detailed in the IBM Cost of the Data Breach report involved shadow AI. And the challenge here is AI enforcement is typically a policy that states don't use unsanctioned AI tools. And as we were joking about when we were planning this webinar, is an AI policy isn't a strategy. Much like hope's not a strategy, neither is an AI policy. And that really segues into this idea, the stat that KPMG found, where it was 57% of employees hid their AI use, while Cisco found that 46% of internal data leaks happen through Gen AI applications. As Hyde kind of touched on, and Peter, you touched on as well, I don't think any of us should be super surprised, especially because employees who want to move fast, be efficient, and experience those gains will use AI. And if they're not allowed to use AI, they're going to hide their AI use so they can kind of keep on moving quicker and quicker, all which are going to contribute to these data leaks and decreasing that security posture. And the big challenge here is this is a balancing act for companies, as the gains from AI are real and they're very powerful, but so are the risks. Peter or Haig, did I miss anything there? I know there's some good stats. You may have something to say. Peter, your hand is up.
Yeah, I love a good stat, man. Um, Honestly, like policy tells people what they should do, and the architecture is what actually determines what happens. The most mature organizations here are moving away from relying solely on acceptable use policies and towards solid blocking controls. Uh, they uh, they work regardless of who receives the file. They work regardless of where the file is, what the system is that the file that holds the file, where it travels, the AI model that processes it. Those are the types of controls and protections that will be important as this, especially with AI becoming a bigger priority, especially with the world only getting bigger, and with the requirements that are being placed on pharmaceutical companies around clinical trials, around protecting EPHI are going to get more strict and more specific. All of it boils down to once the data leaves your environment, the sponsor still owns the risk. So you have to do what is necessary to make sure that you maintain full control wherever it goes. That's my thoughts on these. I don't know. The numbers get me excited, Patrick. That's all I have to say.
That's why I asked you first. Hi, anything else to add before we click on through?
No, just one quick point that you guys both that I absolutely agree with is, these are very complex environments that they live in. These data, and when they go and they travel internally, externally, it's to Peter's point, who receives it, what systems receive it, how can we have better information on that is very key. So Peter, well said.
Thank you.
So there we are. So those are the three big findings. And now I'm going to turn it back to my co-hosts or my co-panelists, and we'll go through one by one, and they can share some final thoughts if they left something on the table that they really wanted to get out. So finding number one, governance ends at the door. Haig and Peter, any closing thoughts?
For me, it's just that the core finding that pharmaceutical companies have been exceptionally good at securing environments, while the industry itself is increasingly depending on moving sensitive data between environments. So governance really ends at the door, right? And the chain is longer than we all think. And AI really, really introduces an entirely new place for data to travel to. And that really leads to a new challenge for the next decade that isn't securing the repository, it's maintaining governance, visibility, and control after the data leaves their environments.
Oh, that's perfect. And Peter, any closing thoughts on the three findings?
I mean, I think it's really important to recognize that there are three findings that, as we've demonstrated over the course of this presentation, all tie together pretty intrinsically at the end of the day. So we wanted to separate them into 3 points because three is a really nice number to talk about, and it really kind of sets up a really good three-act structure. But at the end of the day, they all tie together for the same issue. Um, so I think that's the main thing that I wanted to talk about. But I've also been talking a lot, so maybe we kind of move towards some questions or whatever else, Patrick. Thanks.
Yeah, no, this is great, Peter, and I really like that you highlighted the three findings. It's three, feasible bite-sized pieces for takeaways, and that's where we wanted to turn to next. Just as we start to wrap things up and get ready for questions, a reminder for everyone on the webinar to toss in some questions if you have them, and we'd love to discuss them. Um, so to bring it back to where we started, the shifting nature of work in the pharma and life sciences industry is starting to change how these organizations are securing data, especially as it spends more and more time outside of an organization's four walls. And of course, we're action-oriented people, and we wanted to have 5 recommendations for everyone who's attended to take away. So without further ado, Haig, I'm going to turn it over to you for the first 3 actually
Yeah.
recommendations.
Yeah, so for us, like as Patrick said, taking action is very, very important for us. So for me, the three that stand out is one, encrypt sensitive fields before sharing. Number two, attach protection to the data itself. And three, enforce access control at every destination.
Awesome.
Uh,
And Peter, for you.
Yeah, I mean, the last two we've discussed a lot, that unbroken audit trail, being able to have a full list of historical information on what's happened to your information is extremely important. On top of that, preventing sensitive data from entering AI models in clear text, being able to manage and restrict what types of information are viewed in a AI tool in AI models um, while still allowing for some usability of AI in your company's workflows is obviously going to be a very important goal for the future.
Awesome. All right. So now we're going to turn the page, literally and figuratively, to the this was no question and answer slide. So this will be the question and answer slide. And to everyone who started to submit questions, thank you so much. We're just going to go through them in no particular order and just start to chip away. We have lots of time, so we'll go until we don't want to go anymore. Um, so a question for both the panelists. You said the chain is longer than people think, but once they realize that, what's actually feasible? Is there a way to parse it up or break it down into smaller chunks? How should organizations kind of approach the chain being longer than they think?
I can start with that maybe, Haig,
Sure,
and
go
then
ahead. Yeah, yeah,
you can take
yeah,
afterwards.
absolutely.
I think yeah, it can definitely be an imposing angle, an imposing point of discussion. I think there's arguments to be said about approaching it like grouping by grouping when it comes to external parties. So handling that primary CRO and that relationship first, and then moving on to their sub CROs. Obviously, if you lock things down at the primary RO level, then the expectation is that that would funnel along to all of their instances of interacting with those sub-zeros and the rest of that chain that we discussed. Another angle is also handling how data is being transmitted, kind of section by section. So handling data that's being emailed and all of that, and just kind of locking down any way that you are emailing individual or small groups of files, and then locking down mass file transfers that are, around bigger, groupings of information being passed along, and then handling things like vaults that you would have shared points of information between the sponsor and the primary CRO, or that CRO and the sub CROs, et cetera, et cetera. So there's obviously two angles to this, and there's no good or bad answer. I think it's important to just take the moment to think about the the smoothest way to approach solving that problem, whether that's, if it's a matter of you have a small amount of those primary CROs that you're interacting with, and it's easier to tackle that first, or if you've got a huge number of primary CROs that you're interacting with, and it'd be hard to deal with them on a case by case basis, then just handling it on an internal side of the way that we communicate data is being locked down. That's the way I made a meal out of the question, Hike. So I'll hand it over to you
I
to just kind of
and
wrap it up.
we just had one more question come in, and
Mm.
it's almost a second part, which is very fortuitous. And Haig, maybe you want to step up here because it's a very specific subset of that question. So, if an organization sends data to a CRO or to a third-party vendor, what's the realistic way to enforce protection without breaking the workflow? Is it redaction, encryption, or just hoping? Hopefully, it's not just hoping.
No, and to your point earlier, hope is not a strategy, right?
Not.
So no, it's being proactive with the protection of the data, having that protection live within the data, so that way you can have it being followed to the CRO, having it followed to wherever that CRO and organization does have it travel to. So being proactive is a very key thing to an answer to that. And yeah, hope is not a strategy, like you said earlier.
I appreciate the callback. One more that's not specific to pharma, but specific to cybersecurity, which I think is really topical. We're starting to get questions from the board on quantum risk. Is it an immediate risk? Are we early? Are we kind of in the middle? Are we too late? Peter, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, 100%. Um,
Peter's foaming to answer
Yeah.
that.
I mean, it just came out too. There was like an executive order. I forget the exact number that came out yesterday, I think, or within the past 2 days,
2 days, yeah.
in the States, that is all around quantum in post quantum computing and the preparation for encryptions that handle that. There's a lot, to discuss about the whole harvest now, decrypt later. Yes, there's a lot of conversations around this, and it's obviously kicking up, especially because of that discussion around harvest now, decrypt later being a huge problem, and being something that you kind of want to get ahead of. My opinion is that, and I've obviously got a biased opinion, but my opinion is that you're certainly not too early to be having this conversation, especially with there being executive orders that are coming into play that are occurring now. And obviously, those executive orders don't have solid dates that are locking things down within the next year or 2 years or 3 years. I think a lot of the dates are around 2030. Um, but the important thing to recognize is that if you wait to start working on this issue, that harvest now, decrypt later angle does come into play of if you lose your data and it's not prepared for post-quantum computing encryption, decryption power, then by 2030 or by the time that that is all in play, you will still potentially be a loser in that scenario because of the weakness in your data now. Um, there's also the angle of like NIST has finalized their post-quantum cryptography standards. Pharma data stays sensitive for a long time, as I mentioned. So, you know, not protecting it now means that if it gets stolen or if it gets leaked or if it gets breached, it's in danger for the next 15 to 20 years. And the bad guys have all that time to get access to decryption power that can break into that data. Um, there's a lot to really kind of dive into here, and I know that I'm bouncing around
I
between
think we need
different
to have a
ideas.
webinar just on
Don't threaten
quantum
me with
risk.
a good time. Don't
Yeah,
threaten me with a
quantum
good
risk.
time,
Oh
Pat.
boy, that'd be a lecture.
Uh, what
We're,
what I'll kind of say here, Patrick,
yeah,
just
of
and then I'll
course,
hand it back. But just
of
like
course.
controls that live at the data layer can adapt as cryptographic standards advance without rebuilding the underlying infrastructure. Your information stays protected for today's threat environment and for the next 15 to 20 years threat environment. I think that's what I've been trying to say, um, wrapped in a nice little bow.
I love that. So we have one more, and I'll flip it to Hag first, and then on to you, Peter, if should you wish to answer it. So the question says, we've invested a ton into endpoint protection and perimeter security. What's the argument that that's not enough when it comes to clinical data?
It's a great question. And for me, in my perspective, is endpoints and perimeter security protects where the data lives. Protect the data. Let's protect the data after it leaves those boundaries in those environments. So having, like we've discussed this whole webinar, is having that governance once it leaves your environment.
Awesome. And Peter, the last word to you. I mean, I'll have the last word because I have the last slide, but you will have the last word in the question and answer.
Thanks, Pat. Sucks to hear, recognizing that what Haig says is right. I also understand that it sucks to hear that when you've invested a lot in those protections. Um, those protections are still extremely important. Obviously, that's doing a huge amount of the work of protecting your data right now. We did not necessarily focus on the good things that you're doing right now during this discussion, but the primary area that that you're protecting, that where you have control over your data, is obviously doing a ton of work. We are just trying to shed some light on the areas that have not been focused on as much, and just not trying to scare anybody. I know Patrick called Shadow AI spooky. I apologize for him. He goes off handle sometimes. But I think, yeah, the big point here is the work that you've put in is important and valuable. And a lot of the tools that are coming out, a lot of the protections that are coming out to help deal with the areas that we're talking about today are intended to build atop those tools, to use a line that I like a lot, stand atop the shoulders of giants. So I think that's something that I wanted to add on as well.
Perfect. So there we are. So as always, thank you for joining. We would run a webinar every day if we could, because we love hosting webinars. But thank you for everyone for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us for the last 41 minutes. This is fantastic. The final housekeeping notes: the webinar recording and slides will be shared within the next 24 hours. Hopefully within the next 2 hours. I just have to scramble on the back end. And if you have any questions for the panel, please reach out to Haig and ask him directly. I'll include his email in the follow-up as well. Lastly, we're able to share a copy of the report, so keep your eyes glued to the follow-up email, and you can take a look at the report and dig in yourself. Other than that, thank you everyone so much. It was so fun to spend the last couple of minutes with you, and we'll see you next time down the road. Take care, everyone.